This episode may contain discussion of sensitive and potentially disturbing material that may be upsetting to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
911, where's your emergency?
I can't find my daughter.
A young mom in New Jersey had one seemingly small lapse in judgment on an afternoon in 2019. Something that would cost her her only daughter, and to have her role as mother be forever scrutinized. This is The Cries That Bind Me. What do you think of when you hear the word mother? For some, you may have grown up extremely close to your mom. You may consider her your best friend, someone you can turn to for anything and everything. For others, hearing the word mom may send chills down their spines. It could trigger memories of trauma or neglect, taking them to a dark place they'd just simply rather forget. Whatever your association may be, there's no denying the word mother can hold significant emotional weight. I recently came across a very interesting description of what mother means to one writer. Three Oaks Law writes, quote, "I'd like us to take a step back and reflect on all of the roles of a mother. Mothers are the ultimate protectors, the original sheroes, female superheroes, the knot that keeps the laces together when everything really just wants to fall apart. As moms, we guide, encourage, build, unify, and protect. Sometimes it's not pretty, and at times it looks like the most beautiful thing we've ever seen. Nonetheless, whether our children are grown or infants looking to us to fulfill every need, we're always drawn to protect our children." End quote. Society often labels mothers as nurturers, caregivers, teachers, and most importantly, protectors. So what happens when a mother makes a mistake? Is she a bad mom? A failure? Will she be judged and shunned by society? It was September 16th, 2019. 5-year-old Dulce was standing in her kitchen, crying to her grandma that she didn't want to go to school. It was understandable. She was going to a brand new school, and it was a Monday, always a difficult day after spending the weekend with family. As she put on her school uniform, begging her grandma to let her stay home, her grandma affectionately held her and promised little Dulce she needed to be a big girl. She grabbed her backpack and waited for the bus with her grandma's 8-year-old daughter, Camila, who also went to the same school. At least she had the comfort and support of her young aunt to help her navigate the bus and a brand new school. The girls climbed off the bus around 3:30 that afternoon. Dulce's mom, Noema, had the day off of work and met the girls as the bus dropped them off, something Norma, Noema's mom, typically did. When they got home and took off their backpacks, Dulce asked if they could all go to the park, but Noema was exhausted. It was a hot afternoon. She told Dulce no, but as Dulce begged her mom to take them with tears in her eyes, Noema couldn't resist. She couldn't stand seeing her daughter upset. The girls changed out of their school uniforms and into regular clothes. Noema got her 3-year-old son, Manny, ready to leave. They stopped at a nearby ice cream shop on the way to the park, but as they pulled up, they saw the store was closed. They drove further down the road to a local Sunoco gas station. At 4:01 p.m., Dulce swung open the glass door and happily walked into the store, straight for the ice cream freezer. Her 8-year-old aunt, Camila, walked in behind Dulce. Manny followed with Noema behind him. The girls opened the glass top of the freezer and leaned in, each with one arm stretching down to the bottom to get their ice cream. Camila handed Noema a wrapped popsicle. Dulce chose a coconut water ice cup. Her little brother, Manny, stood with his elbow propped up on the freezer, his head lying in his hand. He looked completely overwhelmed. Noema and Dulce began holding up different ice creams. Manny shook his head. When Noema held up a frozen Snickers ice cream bar, Manny nodded. Noema turned back around to the cashier to pay for their ice creams and a couple scratch-off lottery tickets. Dulce stayed behind her mom, balancing on one foot with her other leg thrown behind her for extra support. Her arms swayed out in front of her as she swayed from side to side. She lowered her right foot back to the floor before looking proudly at Camila, who was standing nearby. When Noema finished paying for everything, the four walked out of the store and climbed back into Noema's car. They drove the 3-minute route to Bridgeton City Park, the big park, as Dulce calls it. As Noema parked near the basketball courts, the kids tore into their ice creams. Manny and Dulce hopped out of the car and ran full speed to the playground, ice creams in hand. Noema's younger sister wanted to get out and play also, but Noema stopped her. She had homework she needed to finish. The car sat about 30 yards away from the playground, just north of the park's basketball courts. Noema could see the play structure where her young kids were playing. The playground, which sat to the east of the courts, offered a climbing course and slides, all of which Noema could see from the front seat of her car. The park's swings, though, were obstructed by the small, grassy slope the basketball courts sat on. Noema sat next to her younger sister, helping her with her homework assignments. She began scratching off the lottery tickets she had purchased just a few minutes earlier at the gas station. 5 minutes passed. Noema could see her kids playing on the bumpy green slide. They were happy. Aside from a man with 2 young kids leaving when they first got there, no one else was there. They had the entire playground to themselves. 10 minutes later, Noema glanced up and saw an empty playground. She watched intently, expecting her kids to run into her field of vision at any second. But they didn't. Noema's younger sister was also scanning the park from the car and said she hadn't seen her young niece or nephew either. Noema and Camila rushed to the playground. They didn't see Dulce on any of the park equipment. She wasn't on the swings hidden behind the basketball court's small hill. The only person in the park was Noema's 3-year-old son, Manny. He was standing nearby, silently crying. His Snickers ice cream lay at his feet. When Noema asked where his sister was, he just continued to cry, pointing at the park's nearby storage buildings. Noema figured Dulce was hiding somewhere near the buildings. She was always so playful. It wouldn't surprise her if Dulce was hiding in wait somewhere, ready to jump out as they walked by. Noema checked the rest of the playground before walking 80 feet south to the storage buildings Manny had pointed to. The buildings were locked. As she turned the corner to check behind the buildings, there was no Dulce. No coconut water ice cup that Dulce may have dropped. All Noema saw was a stretch of road that led you out of the park. An easy exit. Noema's mind started racing. Where was her daughter? She had watched her playing just minutes before. Did she get lost in the thick tree line? Did somebody take her? You can't think like that, she told herself. She shook off the bad thoughts and walked to the basketball courts where some older girls were shooting hoops. She recognized one of the girls as an old classmate of hers. She pulled up a picture of Dulce on her phone and showed it to the girls. They began nodding. They had seen Dulce running on the grass not too long ago. In fact, they saw her running towards the back of the storage buildings just south of the playground. A black guy was walking behind her, one of them thought. Panic began to set in. Noema pulled out her phone again and dialed her brother. You need to come to the park, she urged him. Bring the dog. At 4:48 p.m., Noema called 911. She took deep breaths, trying to calm her shaky voice. Dispatchers began questioning her, trying to understand exactly what had happened. But Noema couldn't tell them. She had no idea. She hadn't seen anything from her car. She didn't find any sign of Dulce in the playground. All she had was the story the girls on the court told her. What was she seen last wearing? The male dispatcher asked her. Noema couldn't remember. She was wearing, give me a second, she tells the dispatcher. You can hear Noema speaking in Spanish to someone nearby. Speaking back into the phone, Noema says, quote, I don't remember what she was wearing, but she was wearing, I just remember her pants. She was wearing like a flowery pants, and some heels, some white heels, end quote. Dulce loved her white heels. Before her phone's battery died, Noema made one last phone call. She called her mother, Norma, Dulce's grandma. Norma had custody of Dulce and saw her as her own daughter. Dulce Maria is not here, Noema told her. Don't joke like that, Norma shot back. I'm not joking, Noema said before she ended the call. In cases like these, it's unfortunately not uncommon to hear stories of officials dropping the ball in those first few critical hours and even days when someone goes missing. They either didn't start searching right away or they failed to interview crucial witnesses. But the Bridgeton City Police hit the ground running from the moment they were notified of Dulce's disappearance. Officials were on scene within minutes of Noema's phone call. In fact, the first responding officer found Noema while she was still on the phone with dispatchers. Officers immediately started searching the area for Dulce. Bridgeton City Police Chief Michael Gaimari knew how important every second was when it came to looking for a missing child. Officials were already behind and lost valuable time after Dulce went missing. By the time Noema called the police, about 40 minutes had passed since she realized Dulce was gone. A lot can happen within 40 minutes. Nevertheless, Chief Gaimari sprung into action. He called in the prosecutor's office, sheriff's department, and state police. He asked for any available officers nearby to come and help search for Dulce. The sun was setting, and they were losing precious daylight. As Noema heard sirens approaching the park, she was certain Dulce would be found. All of their resources would lead them to Dulce. That was what they did. They found missing people. Bridgeton City Park is not your average neighborhood park that sits tucked away in a cul-de-sac. A typical neighborhood park is usually between half an acre to 5 acres on average, with the bigger parks offering bigger fields, maybe a basketball or tennis courts, sometimes a baseball diamond. Bridgeton Park, though, was significantly larger. The park was more like a state park with its overwhelming size and attractions. The park had 4 different playgrounds. It had an outdoor amphitheater, a lake for swimming, various guided walking and wooded trails, a 7,500 square foot splash pad, a fully stocked fishing lake, a museum, a zoo. All of this sitting on over 1,100 acres. When police responded to the call for Dulce, they immediately closed off all access to the park, blocking Mayor Aiken Drive, the road that runs through the entirety of the park. They brought in canines to try to pick up on any fresh scents. The cadaver dogs did lead authorities to the same storage buildings Manny had pointed to earlier, but the scent was lost at the access road that sat just behind the buildings. As authorities continued to search near the storage buildings for Dulce, another team was searching the heavily wooded area that lined the playground. A heavy tree line and thick brush sit just south of the playground. Hidden just beyond the brush is Jetty's Pond, a body of water that can reach about 9 feet deep. Chief Gaimari believed Dulce may have been lost in the wooded area, or worse, may have fallen into the pond that leads to the Cohansey River. Dulce didn't know how to swim, making the possibility that much more concerning. Despite their incredibly swift response and thorough search, authorities were unable to find any clues to indicate what may have happened to Dulce. By nightfall, the dozens of officials and volunteers from the community were forced to pause search efforts until the following day. Reality was finally setting in for Noema. She was certain they would have found Dulce that very day. Now she was being ordered to go home without her little girl. Before she left, Noema asked the officers to issue an Amber Alert. Maybe somebody saw Dulce leaving the park hours earlier. But authorities refused. They didn't have the proper information to release an Amber Alert. Nobody slept that night. Noema didn't even change out of the clothes she was wearing on Monday. By 6 o'clock on Tuesday morning, Noema and her family were already back at Bridgeton Park, tirelessly searching for Dulce. Not long after Noema's family got to the park, authorities were back on scene. Members from the community showed up to help search again and offer support to Noema's family. When asked what drew them out to help, many said as parents themselves, they couldn't possibly imagine what it would be like to have one of their children go missing. There was an incredibly strong sense of community in Bridgeton. The city is in a very rural part of southern New Jersey, completely surrounded by farmland. It was these exact farms that attracted immigrants to move from Mexico to New Jersey. They would get seasonal work helping out on the farms and return back to their homes in Mexico during the off-seasons. But before long, the immigrants traveling back and forth started to realize how much promise Bridgeton held for them. As their seasonal work came to an end, many decided to stay in New Jersey, even if there was no agricultural work available. As more and more people began to stay in Bridgeton, the more crowded the city grew. But with the incline in residents came a community that just grew stronger. The undocumented workers in the area often shared many common hardships. Many had to initially leave their families in Mexico, going months or even years without seeing them. Some sacrificed their health and safety crossing from Mexico into the United States. And most lived in poverty, a struggle that a lot of the Bridgeton families understood. It was all of these common challenges that left residents feeling like Bridgeton was so much more than a city. It was their safe haven, their opportunity to make a life for themselves and their children. Everyone looked after one another. Everyone helped one another. So it was no surprise when Dulce went missing that the community showed up to help search for her. Local businesses donated supplies and food for the search parties. That's what Bridgeton citizens did. On Tuesday afternoon, almost 24 hours after Dulce had been missing, Noema's family confronted her at the park. It was obvious she was struggling. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. All she could do was pray for her daughter's safe return. But Noema was also hiding a secret that the community that once came together to hold Noema up would quickly use against her. Noema's parents, Norma and Camilo, immigrated to New Jersey from Mexico with their 1-year-old baby almost 25 years ago. They had Noema a year later. 3 more babies followed after Noema, with Camila being the youngest. Norma and Camilo's long journey was finally paying off. They made it to America. They had a loving family in a warm home. And for them, most importantly, they were able to offer opportunities to their 5 children that they could have never dreamed of. It was 2013. The kids of the neighborhood were celebrating summer break, a much-needed reprieve from school. As they poured out onto the streets to play and let loose, Noema was at home, panicking. She just learned she was pregnant. And she was only 13. Noema's parents were shocked. She was still in middle school. She was just a child herself. How could she be having a baby? Norma and Camilo thought back on why they immigrated to America, how important it was for their children to have good lives. Noema still had her entire life ahead of her. They told her to stay in school, keep studying. They would help raise her baby. They were young enough. They had just had little Camila barely 3 years before. They would make sure Noema would be okay. 9 months later, on April 25th, 2014, Noema gave birth to a baby girl, her little princess. She was so loving and so incredibly sweet. She was so sweet, in fact, Noema named her Dulce, Spanish for sweet. Noema took the rest of her 8th grade year off of school. She would start school again the next school year as a freshman. In the meantime, she recovered from childbirth and tried to learn how to be a mother. She was 14 years old. The father was 19. As search efforts were underway on Tuesday, donated food was being set up in the central meeting area of the park. Noema's family had seen how much she had deteriorated over the last day and a half. She hadn't eaten a bite. Family members pushed a slice of pizza into Noema's hands. She needed to eat. She was 5 months pregnant with her 3rd baby. As Noema forced herself to take a bite, volunteers noticed her eating. They were disgusted. One volunteer pulled out her phone and began video recording. She yelled at Noema, questioning how she could possibly eat when her child was missing. Other volunteers noticed the commotion and joined the circle of people, asking what was going on. Someone else had taken out their phone and began looking up Noema. Her Facebook page was pulled up, showing older photos of Noema smoking weed, blowing the puffs of smoke into the camera. It all made sense now. Of course this teen mother lost her daughter. She was a partier, irresponsible. She clearly didn't care about Dulce. They could see the proof right there, posted all over her Facebook page. Noema sold Dulce. That was the only rational explanation. Why else would she have stayed behind in the car with the eldest child? It was a setup. The volunteers at the park made sure everyone nearby knew just how little Noema cared about Dulce. There was nothing Noema could do. Her baby girl was missing. Her friends in the neighborhood were turning on her, blaming her for Dulce's disappearance. She put down her pizza and distanced herself from the crowds. It didn't matter what everyone else thought. She couldn't hurt any worse than she already was. By Tuesday night, officials believed they had enough information to put together an Amber Alert. But the community was already outraged. Why wasn't an Amber Alert issued the night she went missing? Weren't the officers frustrated over losing precious time after it took Noema 40 minutes to call 911? How were these very same officials wasting over 30 hours before releasing the Amber Alert? On January 13th, 1996, in Arlington, Texas, 9-year-old Amber Hagerman was riding her new bicycle around her grandma's neighborhood with her 5-year-old younger brother, Ricky. When Ricky returned home without Amber, her family immediately began searching for her. Her bicycle was found in an abandoned parking lot down the street from her grandma's house. A man who lived across the street from the parking lot witnessed a black truck pull up to Amber as she rode her bike in the parking lot. An adult man jumped out of the driver's side, grabbed Amber, and threw her into the cab of the truck. Amber kicked and screamed, but it was too late. She was gone. 4 agonizing days later, 9-year-old Amber Hagerman's naked body was found dumped in a creek bed behind an apartment building. Her throat had been cut multiple times. A local resident, Diane Simone, was watching the evening news one night when she learned of Amber's abduction. She had an idea she thought might help. Why not use the same weather and civil defense alert system to push out alerts on abducted children? With the help of local law enforcement, her idea was officially implemented by the Dallas-Fort Worth broadcast system in 1996. On April 30th, 2003, President George W. Bush signed a new act that would help create a national emergency response system. This system would later be called America's Missing Broadcast Emergency Response, or AMBER for short, in honor of Amber Hagerman. The Department of Justice has minimum standards it recommends for issuing Amber Alerts, but ultimately each state controls its own set of criteria. New Jersey has its Amber Alert plan available on their state's website. It says, in part, quote, Amber Alerts are intended to be issued when there is reason to believe that a child has been abducted and may be in danger of death or serious bodily injury. Amber Alerts are not intended for all missing child incidents, runaways, or child custody situations. The activation of an Amber Alert in any case where there is no objectively reasonable basis to believe that a child has been abducted and may be in danger of death or serious bodily injury would undermine the program's effectiveness. Accordingly, it is the policy of the state of New Jersey that an Amber Alert should only be activated by the state police when the circumstances meet specific criteria that are set forth below. Number 1. There is reason to believe that a child under the age of 18 has been abducted. Number 2. There is reason to believe that the abducted child may be in danger of death or serious bodily injury. Number 3. There is reason to believe that an Amber Alert would assist in locating the child considering all relevant circumstances, including whether there is enough descriptive information available and the amount of time that has elapsed since the child was last seen and was reported missing. End quote. After completing another full day of searching and conducting interviews, officials believed they had sufficient evidence to believe Dulce had been abducted. Around 10 p.m. on Tuesday, September 17th, the following Amber Alert was released.
Police have released this description of the man they believe took the child. Police say he is light-skinned, possibly Hispanic, standing 5'6" to 5'8" with a thin build. He has acne, but no facial hair. Police say he was last seen wearing orange sneakers, red pants, and a black shirt, and driving a red van with a sliding door and tinted windows. Police have reason to believe the suspect abducted the little girl just before 5 o'clock Monday.
The only problem? The description came from a young child. Thursday, September 19th, marked another agonizing day without Dulce. Jackie Rodriguez, the new family friend and spokesperson, organized a vigil to show support to Dulce's family.
That whoever has her, oh God, that they will feel conviction, oh God. I pray that you will allow Dulce to feel our love even from here, oh God, even from Bridgeton.
Dozens of community members, along with friends and family of Dulce's, came together at the park where Dulce vanished. They all wore yellow shirts in honor of Dulce, the same color shirt she was wearing before she disappeared. On day 4 of the search, Noema received a phone call. Her 27-year-old boyfriend, the father of the baby she was pregnant with, was being interviewed by police. It was nothing new. Although it had only been 4 days, Noema and her family were already used to the questions. They told their versions of events over and over. They handed over their cell phones, their laptop. They took polygraph tests. Anything to find Dulce. But when Noema's boyfriend sat down with authorities, they were stuck. He only spoke Spanish. Noema got on the phone to translate for him. She relayed all of his answers in English to officials who were on the other end of the line. She hung up as soon as officials were done questioning him. But as the hours passed, her boyfriend still hadn't come home. He had been detained by Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, for being a non-citizen. Unfortunately for Noema, it wasn't the first time she was affected by ICE. When Dulce was born, Dulce's father, Edgar Perez, wanted nothing to do with her. He truly believed the baby wasn't his. But as Dulce got older, Edgar couldn't deny the physical similarities between the sweet, almond-eyed baby girl and himself. No official paternity test was ever taken, but Edgar eventually accepted Dulce as his own. Before long, he was hooked. He spent as much time with Dulce as he could, something that Noema's mom, Norma, tried to prevent. After all, this man had gotten her 13-year-old daughter pregnant. He initially denied Dulce was his. He refused to help Noema or their new baby. Norma wanted nothing to do with him and wanted him far away from Noema and Dulce. Still, with Noema's help, Edgar maintained a relationship with Dulce. Noema never denied him time with his daughter. In late 2018, Edgar was arrested. He was unable to provide any paperwork showing his American citizenship. He had come to New Jersey illegally. By December, Edgar was deported back to Culiacan, Mexico. His recent plan to fight for custody of Dulce was put on hold indefinitely. Dulce's case continued to gain traction, especially on social media. But instead of focusing on finding Dulce, strangers began to pick Noema apart, holding nothing back. Noema's young age was usually the focal point of each attack. People commented on Noema becoming pregnant at 13 by an older man. How was it even possible? The only explanation the public accepted was horrifying. Norma forced her young daughter into prostitution. 2 weeks after Dulce's disappearance, Noema called a press conference that was held at Bridgeton Park. As Noema talked about her daughter and answered questions, she held a toy close to her chest. When a reporter asked Noema what she was holding, Noema held up the Elsa figure, explaining it was Dulce's favorite. She loves to play Frozen. She always used to sing it, Noema told reporters. She always used to tell me to put her song Frozen. She always listens to it, Noema explained. As she described how much Dulce loved anything and everything Frozen, for a brief moment, she stood up taller. The corners of her mouth began to curl upwards, the faintest glimmer of happiness in her eyes. Noema added, quote, "She even has a dress. She even puts it on thinking that she's Frozen," end quote. Or Elsa? One reporter clarified. Yes, Noema said. She smiled. But a moment later, her eyes turned hollow again. She looked down at the podium that stood before her. She just wanted Dulce back. Noema's press conference did little to persuade the public that she was a grieving mother desperately fighting for her daughter to come home. Like every other time Noema was put into the spotlight, the public concentrated more on watching Noema than listening to her pleas for help. She was flat, emotionless, Mexican. As curious onlookers spent the days after Dulce's disappearance discussing Noema's suspicious behavior online, a teacher from neighboring Vineland School District couldn't resist sharing her opinion. People couldn't stop asking, How could Noema sit in the car as her young kids were playing so far away? Some comments chalked it up to her young age. At 19 years old, your brain isn't fully mature. As a 19-year-old, maybe she just didn't understand how sitting 30 yards away from her children while they played alone in a park would be unsafe. Her parents did the same with her while she was growing up. A lot of families did it. So Noema never thought anything like this could ever happen. Others argued back that age didn't matter. 30 yards away wasn't a short distance. A semi-truck, some call it an 18-wheeler, measures about 16 yards long. A full 10-pin bowling lane runs 20 yards long. A standard basketball court is 31 yards long. That's how far away Noema sat, distracted in her car. She wasn't even watching them, according to comments online. That wasn't uncommon, according to that Vineland school district teacher. She boldly commented, quote, "They're Mexican. It's their culture. They don't supervise their children like we do." End quote. Comments were merciless, but supporters of Noema defended her, pointing out that English was not her first language. It was obvious she faced challenges expressing herself fluently in English. She seemed to pause frequently to search for the right words or translations. But when Noema was asked to speak to Dulce in Spanish, her native language, Noema spoke more smoothly. She didn't seem to struggle to communicate. But most importantly, Noema was able to express herself more freely. Noema's apparent lack of empathy or emotion wasn't because she didn't care, far from it. Instead, she was just so focused on speaking proper English that it left little room to outwardly show her true emotions. As coverage of Dulce's disappearance began broadcasting across news channels, a resident in neighboring Vineland felt compelled to help. Jackie Rodriguez was a mother herself. She couldn't imagine what Noema and her family were going through. As a mother, I said, "Wow, if this were to happen to me, I wouldn't want everyone to be attacking me, to be talking about me. I just need help," Jackie would later explain to reporters. As soon as she reached out to the Alavez Perez family, she became the unofficial, self-appointed spokeswoman for them, lining up interviews, search parties, and vigils. But within days, Jackie began to be the target of online attacks. She was accused of causing more harm than good and only being involved to cash in on the reward money. Concerned over her own family's well-being, she put up security cameras around her home and stepped down as the family spokesperson. By the end of September, just 2 weeks after Dulce had gone missing, the reward was up to $35,000. Authorities were able to speak with Edgar Perez, Dulce's dad, who was still in Mexico. While they were able to just do the initial questioning by phone, they were confident that Edgar was not involved in Dulce's abduction. Investigators felt like they were running out of options. Dive teams checked the nearby bodies of water. Helicopters had been flown over the wooded areas of the park. Canines had been brought in. Multiple agencies searched on foot along with hundreds of volunteers from the community. Hundreds of people were interviewed. Hours of nearby surveillance footage was studied. But they were no closer to finding out what happened to Dulce than they were on day one. On September 24th, the FBI officially added Dulce to their 10 most wanted list as a missing person. 2 weeks later, in early October, authorities announced they had a sketch of the person of interest. The suspect was first described as wearing orange sneakers, red pants, and a black t-shirt. The new description stated the man was wearing a white t-shirt, denim blue jeans, and a white baseball cap, vastly different from the bright clothing the first witness described. The second witness, an adult who came forward after the initial searches and interviews, also described the suspect as a 30 to 35-year-old Hispanic man. He was approximately 5 foot 7 inches, with a slender build and acne on his chin. Authorities used this description to generate a sketch of the man they called a potential witness, not a person of interest. 2 more months went by with no breaks in the case. In December of 2019, Noema appeared on the Dr. Phil show. Dr. Phil has received an overwhelming amount of hate over the years, mostly due to the fact that he is not a doctor or a practicing psychologist. Dr. Phil is simply a television personality. He hosts a talk show, much like Montel Williams, Ricky Lake, and even Jerry Springer. Despite the harsh judgment Dr. Phil has received, he continues to raise awareness on cases the media might not be covering or not covering enough. He asks tough questions that everyone wants to know the answers to. And when Noema sat privately with Dr. Phil, he did just that. People have been wanting to ask you, did you do this? Did you sell your daughter? Are you involved in her abduction? Do you know who has her? I'm asking you those questions so people can hear you from your own lips say the answer to those questions, and you've answered them. You did not sell your daughter, correct? Dr. Phil asked. No, Noema responded. You don't know who has her? No, she said again. You're not involved in her abduction? No. So, what could have happened? Does Noema have any possible idea of who could have taken her that day? Unsure of what to say, Noema told Dr. Phil she believed it may have been an acquaintance of hers who wanted to be with her romantically. Noema had no interest in a relationship with him and repeatedly turned him down. Could that have been a motive for taking Dulce? To get back at Noema? Noema would later admit she never suspected that acquaintance. With Dr. Phil's questioning, she felt pressured to name someone, and having interacted with the friend recently, he was the first name that popped into her mind. During that same segment, Jackie Rodriguez sat down with Dr. Phil on her own. She revealed she was no longer working with or representing the family. Noema made it too difficult. Jackie explained, quote, "She seems too calm. I feel like she knows her child is okay. She's missing her, but she knows she's okay. I've never seen her freaking out. I've seen her cry just once." End quote. Noema was just as flat on Dr. Phil as she was during any other public appearance, giving the public more reason to cast doubt on her. Although the Dr. Phil episode seemed to do little to help Noema or the family, Dr. Phil selflessly contributed $22,000 for Dulce's return, bringing the total reward up to $75,000. In March 2020, 6 months after Dulce went missing, the world was facing major changes.
The Centers for Disease Control says the coronavirus is going to spread in the United States.
One person with coronavirus has died.
9 Americans now have died. 11 people have died from coronavirus. Tonight, the first containment.
The coronavirus made its way into the United States, and by March 12th, the first quarantine orders were put into place. As lockdown orders began to grow more and more strict, it was putting a ton of pressure on law enforcement. Their search efforts to find Dulce were significantly affected, limiting their available resources to aid in the investigation. While the world was trying to navigate this new way of life, cryptic letters began to pop up in some Ohio mailboxes. A casino and racetrack in Austintown, Ohio, received an index card in the mail. Handwritten on the card was, quote, 76 Truck Stop, Dead End Street, Entrance Woods. Please look. End quote. Investigators followed the tips and searched a wooded area off of Interstate 80. Just like the note hinted, it was near a truck stop. Officials weren't able to find anything during their search. The return address on the envelope was illegible, but they were able to read the zip code. It was located in Culiacan, Mexico. A second piece of mail containing a 2-page letter was sent to a library in Austintown. The letter included details about Dulce's disappearance from the Bridgeton City Park and referenced Noema's appearance on Dr. Phil. This envelope showed a Cleveland, Ohio postmark. An ice cream shop in Wethersfield Township, Ohio, received the third piece of mail. The shop was closed during its off-season, but the owner stopped by periodically to check on the shop and collect any mail that had been delivered. The index card that was sent to the store did include Dulce's name, but didn't include any other useful or relevant information. Jackie Rodriguez, the family's former spokeswoman who was back to helping them, was shocked to find a letter waiting in her mailbox, too. It was postmarked Cleveland, Ohio, and included 7 pages of mostly illegible scribbles. The writing was sloppy and incredibly difficult to read, but the following words were able to be picked out: Alaska, Mexico, border, 1776, Civil War, New England town, and Kids Home Orphanage. Dulce's case has been a confusing one from the beginning. Many details just don't add up for a lot of people. Many community members are certain Noema sold her daughter. Law enforcement, on the other hand, believes it was a crime of opportunity. Was someone in the park that day that saw Dulce as an easy target? They may have been there for completely innocent reasons, but seeing two young, unsupervised children might have given them the courage to grab Dulce. Statistically, minors who are reported missing are typically runaways. Children who are actually abducted, though, are usually taken by a family member or acquaintance. Stranger abductions are much more rare and only make up about 25% of abduction cases. Did a complete stranger happen to take advantage of that small window of opportunity? Or did Dulce knowingly leave with someone she knew? Noema's son, Manny, acted out what he saw just moments before Dulce disappeared. Those storage buildings he pointed to the day she vanished? A man was waiting back there, motioning for Dulce to follow him. Although Manny was still unable to speak very many words, he showed Noema how the man held up his hand in the air, beckoning Dulce to come closer. But Noema was adamant Dulce would never run off with a stranger. She knew about stranger danger. So did Noema help someone take her daughter that Monday afternoon? Manny was nonverbal. She kept the only child who could speak up far away in the car with her. Noema didn't want to be a mom. She was young. She had more partying to do, people reasoned. She even signed over custody of Dulce to her parents shortly after she was born. She obviously didn't want her. If that were the case, though, why was Noema so involved in Dulce's life? Although she didn't live with Dulce at the time she went missing, Noema still visited her at Norma's house. Noema's parents had full custody of Dulce. They were her legal guardians. They provided for her, took care of her. What could Noema possibly gain from plucking Dulce out of that home? Months went by with no updates. By June of 2023, the Anti-Predator Project joined law enforcement in the search for Dulce. 3 months later, in September, the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office worked with the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They generated an age progression photo of Dulce, showing what she might look as a 9-year-old. A dozen new tips came in with information on her disappearance and possible sightings. Investigators are working through their new leads, although they have confirmed some of the tips turned out to be unrelated to Dulce. Dulce Maria Alavez went missing from Bridgeton City Park in southern New Jersey on September 16, 2019, at approximately 4:20 p.m. She speaks both English and Spanish fluently and never turns down a good cartoon, especially Baby Shark, although her absolute favorite thing to watch is Frozen. At the time of her disappearance, Dulce was wearing a yellow short-sleeved t-shirt with the graphic of a white elephant on the front. She wore black and white checkered print leggings with big white daisies and butterflies running down both legs. Her white, open-toed sandals had a chunky heel with a faux leather bow across the toes. She stood approximately 3.5 feet tall and weighed between 60 and 70 pounds. She has light olive skin with brown hair and brown, almond-shaped eyes and is of Hispanic descent. As of 2024, she would be 9 years old. There is a $75,000 reward for any information leading to the whereabouts of Dulce. When asked if Noema had anything she wanted Dulce to know, she replied in Spanish, "I should have been there, by her side, the whole time. I wish I could rewind time and be there with her and tell her how much I love her and spend all the mother-daughter time with her. But I'm very sorry for not having been such a good mother and for being careless the day with her and her brother." If you have any information regarding Dulce or her disappearance, please contact the Bridgeton City Police Department at 856-451-0033. You can also submit an anonymous tip by going to bpd.tips or ccpo.tips on any computer, tablet, or smartphone. Your immigration status will not be questioned. For more information on this episode, including relevant photos, full transcript, and sources used, please visit thecriesthatbindme.com.